Welcome to Beyond the Post with Rob Dunwood and Bodie Grimm. I'm Rob Dunwood.
And I'm Bodie Grimm. And friends, it is DTNS Experiment Week, and Beyond the Post is taking over the feed. The DTNS crew is on vacation, but they have made sure that you have something to listen to. Rob and I are recording a very special episode of Beyond the Post for Daily Tech News Show listeners.
And for all of you that have not listened to a episode of Beyond the Post or watched an episode of Beyond the Post, Bodie and I decided to get together late last year and create a podcast where we talk to podcasters and bloggers and YouTubers, newsletter writers, authors, social media personalities, social media managers, basically anyone who is creating content or managing the production of content. We want to have conversations with and find out not just how they do what they do, or what they actually do, but why they actually do it.
In addition, Rob and I create what we call Between the Post episodes, where it's just Rob and I talking about a specific topic that is of interest to creators.
That's the kind of episode that we're doing today. So sit back, strap in as Bodie and I take you beyond the post, where we discuss platforms for creators. So, Bodie, when you and I first started talking about creating a Beyond the Post episode, specifically for Daily Tech News Show, in the experiment week that we're in, you threw out the idea about talking about the various platforms that creators put their content on. And that got me to thinking about just Daily Tech News Show and all the places that we post that show to. The show starts off as a live stream. It's live streamed to Twitch and to Discord. It is a podcast. So you're going to be able to listen to the show in all the places that you listen to podcasts, whether it be Apple Podcast or Spotify or Beyond Pod or Pocket Cast or whatever the case is. Wherever podcasts show up, it's going to show up there. It also is a YouTube channel. There is a DTNS YouTube channel. If you were to go over there, you will find all the videos that we create that are basically just rebroadcast of the live stream. There is a dailytechnewsshow.com website. When you go to that website, you're going to see the YouTube videos embedded. You will also see podcast episodes, the audio files actually embedded into the website. There's all kind of social media clips, whether it be on Twitter or I should say X, whether it be on Instagram. You're going to find those there. And there's even a Daily Tech News Show newsletter. So I say all that to say this. There's a heck of a lot of places that creators can create content and post it onto the internet.
This is something we're trying to do better at with Beyond the Post. There's a lot of places that you can place your content, but it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of time. The positive thing is one of the things that makes these platforms so sticky is they make it easy for you to create specifically for their platform. And that is definitely a positive, but it's also a negative.
Yeah, there's a phrase that is often thrown around creator circles. It is be everywhere. And we recently interviewed LA-based social media personality Lamar Wilson, aka the CEO of Unboxings. And one of the things he contributes to his success, Lamar has millions and millions of followers across multiple platforms. But one of the things that he attributes to his success is the fact that he actually posts his vertical video, because he's exclusively at this point vertical video. He posted on as many as 6 different places. So one of the things that Lamar will tell you, though, is that he didn't start off posting all of his content to 6 different places. So I tend to modify the be everywhere mantra to be everywhere, just not everywhere at once, especially when you're first starting out. Or there's probably a better way to say that: be everywhere that makes sense.
Rob, those are really wise words. You're going to have to put out some feelers and test the waters and find out where your community is going to be at. And we're going to talk about how to find your community on these different social media websites and podcast sites. But we're also going to talk about the dangers of putting all your content in one place.
So the type of content that you create is probably the biggest factor in determining where you post said content. Today, we're going to focus on rich media, or content that you can watch or listen to more so than just read. So this is going to be things like live streams, vlogs, podcasts, etc. And since we are podcasters, that's where we're going to start. So you may have heard a podcaster say something. I know I say this all the time, Bodie. It is download the show wherever you get your podcast. And the reason that so many podcasters say that, they probably shouldn't. I probably should. But the reason they say it is because their podcasts are literally everywhere. A function of a great many podcasting hosts is that they will literally take your RSS and they will push it out to directories all over the internet just to make sure that the most people are able to listen to your show. So as I said, your podcasting host may take care of that, but there are a few places that regardless of whether your host is taking care of you or not, you want to absolutely make sure that your show is available on just a few platforms that we're going to talk about.
So let's start with Apple Podcasts.
So Apple Podcasts generally is usually the number 2, maybe number 3 place that people listen to podcasts. It's absolutely massive. And, sometimes depending on the list you're looking at, it's going to be number 1 or number 2. But what I recommend, even though your podcasting host may push your content out to Apple Podcast, I strongly recommend that you actually go to, Apple Podcast Connect, create an account if you don't already have one, and manually establish your show there where you're going to create your show, add your RSS, and instead of it being pushed from your podcast host, Apple Podcast is actually pulling your RSS directly. The reason I recommend that is because Apple has great metrics and statistics that you can go and look at. There are all types of analytics that you can take a look at when you become a member of, Podcast Connect. And the other thing is that because it is such a massive platform, as I said, it's, in the United States, it's generally in the top 3 as far as where people listen to podcasts. You simply just want to be there. There's all kind of benefits you're going to get when it comes to using Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, and a little bit more about the analytics. It's so beneficial because we use Acast for our hosting, and Acast will tell us how many people downloaded this show. Apple Podcast Connect will tell us at what point in time they left. What percentage of people left at this point? Oh, well, we talked a lot about AI at this point. Maybe we don't talk about AI anymore, or maybe we make AI a lesser part of the show. It will actually tell you, 3 minutes in, everybody left, or 70% of people left. So you can look at the first 3 minutes and you could say, well, what do I need to do to make that more engaging? Or what topics were we talking about? Every single time we talk about AI, for instance, and this isn't real, I'm just using it as an example, people drop off. And that's really beneficial. Now, that's only for people who listen on Apple Podcasts. Like, you're not going to, if somebody's listening on Overcast, you're not going to get that data, but at least it's something for you to use going forward, because if they're dropping off on Apple Podcasts, they're probably dropping off on other services as well.
You absolutely can extrapolate.
Do you think Apple has been a pretty good steward so far of podcasting in terms of how they treat podcasters?
I think so, because one of the things, I am not a iPhone user. I don't use an iPad. So I'm not inside of that world, but I would definitely, if I could install Apple Podcasts on Android, it might be something that I would use. It would definitely be one of the podcatchers that I have on my device. And one of the reasons I really like what Apple is doing is that they're not really trying to monetize it in any significant way. They've done some things here in the not too distant, past, where you can create like private RSS feeds and those kind of things. But generally for the masses, they are just providing a service to iPhone and iPad users and Mac OS users, to where I think that Apple Podcast is arguably one of the best at doing that, because they have a single app that literally millions upon millions upon millions of people, hundreds of millions, if not in the millions of people use for listening to podcasts.
Yeah. And I think the key feature there or the key word that you said is they're not trying to really monetize podcasts, because then that brings us to Spotify. And as you know, I don't like Spotify.
Yeah, I understand where you are coming from when you're talking about Spotify and just not liking it. I am not let's just say this. I have family that require that I have a family membership to Spotify. Therefore, I have Spotify. If it was not for my children and my wife, I probably just wouldn't use it. I'd find something else. That being said, there's a lot of people that listen to podcasts on Spotify. And it's simply because it's the tool that they have. They use Spotify. Spotify is absolutely massive. And because they're using it, it's already on their phone. If they want to go listen to a podcast, they just go to the thing that they're already using. So because of that, I say that your podcast should be listed in Spotify. Now, there's two ways to do it. There is the Apple Podcast way, where you're simply just adding your RSS feed to Spotify. And like any other podcatcher, it's just pulling that information in. And whenever you release a new episode, it just shows up in their directory. Spotify is also a podcasting host. And that's where I tend, Buddy, not to try to get into people's pockets. It is a free host. And I'm not going to tell you that, I would never recommend any free products. But when it comes to your podcasting host, I've just heard too many horror stories about people who have used Spotify as their podcasting host, and through no fault of their own, a policy changed, or, someone thought that your podcast was doing one thing that it wasn't doing, and they just delete your show. I've seen people get their shows back, but once they do that delete feature, it's like if you had any private RSS, readers or anything like that, you got to go reset all that up. If you had anybody who was subscribing to you, you've got to go get them all to resubscribe if they put that back. I have seen very nightmarish situations from people who are using it as their actual podcasting host. So I don't recommend it. I don't recommend against it, but I just don't recommend that that's what you would do. But it is free. It does provide some analytics. It's not as great. I don't think that people who use it would say it's not as great as if you were actually using a dedicated host. And then it does hamper you a little bit when it comes to monetization, if you ever want to get to that in your show. But Spotify is definitely a place where you can not only list your podcast in a directory, but you can host your podcast on their platform. And right now it's free.
I'm gonna do two things here. First one is I'm going to give you a reason not to use it, and then the second one is I'm going to give you a reason maybe to play nicely with Spotify. Maybe you don't want to use Spotify for podcasters free hosting, but you may want to play inside their ecosystem. I'm going to give you the first one is the negative one. Spotify acquired Anchor. I don't even know how many years ago, but it was a while ago. Anchor was a free tool that allowed podcasters to host, publish, and record their podcasting episodes. And they had lots of cool features, like your listeners could call and leave a message, and then you could respond to that message, and that could go out on the podcasting feed. Pretty cool stuff. And it was free. And arguably the most useful feature was the ability to record. Like, it is not hard to record a podcast, but there's a little intimidation factor that you have to overcome. And Anchor, when they created their service, they kind of just gave you a button, you push the button, and it recorded. That was it. Recently, Spotify chose to stop offering that record your podcast on their app. So they took that feature away. They did offer, or they did partner with Riverside, which is what Rob and I use. We're recording our podcast right now on Riverside as a kind of a replacement, but that's not free. So that's problematic. But Spotify recently set up the ability for people to comment on your podcast, which is cool. They say in their news brief, it says, "Hey, we've recently released this feature. It increases community engagement on your podcast," and that is true. We all want to build community. Building community is super important. Unfortunately, if your community isn't on Spotify, it's kind of useless. So today, right before we recorded, I do an EV News podcast. I went on my Spotify account and I looked, and I had like 6 different comments over the last, 6 months or so. And I had not responded to any of them. I didn't even know they existed. So to the people who, actually commented on Spotify, I look like a jerk. And I didn't even set this up, as far as I know. I'm not saying I didn't. I just say I don't remember if I did. But I also looked at my stats, and only 3% of the people who listen to that podcast listen on Spotify. 0.55% of people who listen to this podcast Beyond the Post listen on Spotify. Not DTNS, but Beyond the Post. So less than 1%. But I have a music recommendation podcast, and 90% of people listen on Spotify. So in that case, it makes more sense for me to spend a little bit more time and be more open to building a community on Spotify, because 90%, and this podcast gets really good numbers in terms of downloads, 90% of our listeners are coming from Spotify. And actually, this is kind of a revelation, because I had no idea. I never even paid attention until today.
Yeah, like I said, the numbers don't lie. I don't want to say every, but many of the surveys that you will look at out there, they generally have Spotify one, two, or three. And oftentimes you will see Spotify and Apple battling it out. Now we're going to get into talking about YouTube here shortly. Believe it or not, YouTube, according to this report by Westwood One, is the favored way that at least listeners in the United States like to listen to or view podcasts. It's actually YouTube. So you will find a lot of podcasting type of surveys that simply don't even include YouTube. So it's always going to be Spotify number one, Apple number two, Apple number one, Spotify number two. But when you actually take into account the number of people that listen and even prefer to listen or view via YouTube, YouTube is actually the number one way that at least US listeners listen to podcasts. So like you feel about Podcast Buddy, I feel about YouTube. I feel some kind of way about it. I've been podcasting a long time, over 18 years. And one of the things that has kind of come with podcasting is that it's generally always been open. That isn't necessarily the case anymore, particularly when you're talking about putting let's say, because you can do a video podcast and put that into Spotify. But once you put it into Spotify is the way you actually are able to access it. And then, of course, there is YouTube. YouTube has, given podcasters the ability to host video podcasts for years. And that's generally, the default place that people go to look at podcasts is on YouTube. And that's the default place where they listen to it. But what YouTube has figured out, what Google has figured out is that, wait a minute, we have people who are not only listening and watching our videos in YouTube, we have people who are simply just listening to videos that are posted there. There may be audio only video files that are posted to YouTube. So one of the things that Google has recently done is that Google has dabbled in podcasting pretty much since the beginning. If you go all the way back, they had a tool called Google Play where you could listen to podcasts. Then they swapped that out for Google Podcasts. Google Podcasts was okay. I think it only ever attained maybe 4 or 5% market share globally, as far as, when you compared it to Spotify, when you compared it to an Apple Podcast. But it was an okay tool. It was not great, but it was not bad. It worked. If you wanted to listen to a podcast and you had an Android device, you had a default application, and Google Podcasts would allow you to do that. What Google decided to do recently was they deprecated Google Podcasts and they replaced it with YouTube Music. Not to confuse you with YouTube Music, the Spotify style application from YouTube where you can go and buy your music there. It's similar to be like, Amazon Prime Music or even, Apple Music. It's a similar service to that. So it is YouTube, but it's separate from YouTube, but it is YouTube. So the problem that I have with YouTube Music is that it simply is not a proper podcatching application. When it first came out, you couldn't even use RSS with it. And, they've actually, updated that, but it's still not a proper application in the sense of a podcatcher from my experience, because the only way to search for a show is to search for shows that are YouTube videos. It won't show you podcasts that are not on YouTube. It'll only show you what they have, in the actual YouTube directory, which is okay. That's how they're deciding to do it. But the reason they're doing it is because they have so many people that are listening and watching podcasts that they are saying, well, maybe we can actually increase the number of people who are using YouTube Music if we actually combine everything with podcasts. I don't know if that's the right decision or the wrong decision, but I will say this. I've come around on this. I think that if you have a podcast, whether it be a video podcast or an audio only podcast, an audio first podcast, it probably makes sense, unless it doesn't, to put it on YouTube. Because one of the things about YouTube is that it is the second biggest search engine in the world to Google itself. So if you want to be discovered, and knowing that at least in the US, most US respondents to various surveys say they would rather watch or listen to a podcast on YouTube, you probably want to make sure that your podcast is on YouTube. And some of the other things that Google has done very recently, that YouTube has done very recently, is that they've allowed you to add your audio only podcast via RSS to YouTube. And it's pretty easy. You literally just drop your RSS. It'll go out, pull down your episode, and then turn that episode into an actual MP4 file, load it up to YouTube. You can put your album artwork and all that kind of stuff there. And you literally now have your podcast on YouTube. Now, it is going to be fractured. You're not going to see all of your podcasting statistics from your podcast host. If you're hosting your podcast on Spotify, you're not going to see your Spotify analytics go up when somebody listens, because what YouTube is doing is they actually pull your show to their server, and then they serve it from their server, not from its originating server. So that's kind of problematic, but so many people listen to it. I've come around on this. I just now think that unless there's a reason for you not to, there's probably, it probably makes sense for you to put your podcast on YouTube. So now it's going to be available via the regular YouTube app. It'll be, available via the YouTube webpage. It'll be available via the YouTube Music app on your devices.
Rob, can we go back a little bit to, the listens on or views on YouTube that would be different and not reflect back to your analytics? Let's say, because we use Acast, for instance. So if we put the show on YouTube with the RSS feed, and let's say we get X number of downloads, but we're getting Y number of downloads on YouTube, why does that make a difference? Why would we care, other than we need to know how many people are viewing the show? But what else does that have an effect on?
Well, if someone, let's say you're dealing with an advertiser and they want to know how many downloads of your show, that's not necessarily the best way to set up, sponsorships, but it is a way. And they want to know, well, how many downloads do you get? Well, your analytics are going to be fractured. So when we host on Acast creates an RSS feed. And one of the features of Acast is that it actually pushes out your RSS feed to various other podcatching services or podcast directories. So Acast can automatically push your RSS feed to Beyond Pod. It can automatically push it to Pocket Cast. It can automatically push it to RSS.com. It can automatically push it to all these places that basically scrape RSS and then load the podcast to where they're not playing from those services. They're just directories that will point that information back to Acast in our case. So it doesn't matter if someone listens to our show on Apple Podcast. It doesn't matter if someone listens to our show on Spotify, Beyond Pod, Pocket Cast, any of these podcatching applications. Every time someone listens, that gets reflected in our stats on Acast, because Acast is ultimately hosting the file. So they know when someone downloads, they can look and see completion rates, all those kind of things. That is all coming from Acast. But when you load your podcast via RSS up to YouTube, what YouTube does is they're not just redirecting people back to Acast to download and listen to a show or to download and view a show. What they are doing is they're downloading the actual file to their server, and then they serve it via YouTube. So what that means is that we could look at our analytics on Acast and never have YouTube reflected in it, because there's no linkage between them. All YouTube did was download the file and then is reserving it. So we would now have to go to YouTube and look at their analytics to find out how many people are listening to our show via YouTube. Not a huge deal, but it is a deal, because now you've got fractured metrics. And the same thing could go for Spotify. We didn't really talk about this, but you can actually upload your MP4s to Spotify as well. So if you want to use a video podcast and actually post that on Spotify, you can do that. But only people in Spotify are going to see it. And if you initially are hosting your file on YouTube, those files are going to be fractured as far as their analytics. So you just got multiple places you need to go to figure out how many people are listening to your show and what ways are they listening to it.
Okay. And then and another kind of in the same vein as advertisers, we use automatic ads in Acast for the show. So anything that goes out to YouTube would not count towards those ads that we would that ad money that we would potentially get.
That is very true. In fact, it is so true that per YouTube's terms of service, you cannot inject automatic ads or dynamic ads into your RSS feed that you're sending them. So you need to send them a clean feed. So our Acast feed for Beyond the Post, it actually has embedded ads at the beginning, in the middle of the show, and at the end. In order to take that and upload that file directly to YouTube, we'd have to give them a clean feed that does not have those embedded ads. Now we could do host read ads. Those are going to be fine because they'll consider that content, but we couldn't have a mark in the show to where here's our ad break and then have something dynamically inserted in there. And that's one of the reasons why I have not yet put all of my shows on YouTube, because I do actually have some shows that have ads baked in. And the problem for me is that, well, if I want to put this on YouTube, I have to remove my ads. But I actually, have Patreon, I'm set up. I have Patreon set up for multiple shows. And one of the benefits of becoming a Patreon is to actually have an ad-free feed. So I wouldn't want to create a situation where all you have to do is bypass listening in your podcatcher, and then you can go listen on YouTube where I'm not allowed to actually put my ads. And that's going to take that benefit away from people who are actually paying not to have ads in their ad feature. You would ultimately have to get monetized, which is not insignificant. You have to have so many watch hours. You have to have so many subscribers on YouTube before you could get monetized there. And that's when you would be able to, stick ads in your content. They're going to do it for you, regardless of whether or not you're monetized or not. But if you want to actually receive the benefit of it, you actually have to be monetized on their platform.
Yeah. And I think the way we do our show on for this specific show is we intentionally do a video version as well as an audio version, and we upload the video version and we treat that as YouTube. We don't treat that as specifically a podcast. We treat that version as a YouTube show. And so you can, if you change your mindset a little bit, you can, work within the system.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. And if I were starting out, I would definitely start out on YouTube. I would just probably do some host read ads for all the YouTube stuff, to go from there, just so you can actually have some monetization. And like I said, I don't really have a problem with YouTube per se. I just have a problem with Google just changes gears so often. So is YouTube Music going to be the thing? Another thing about, the Google Podcast app is that, there are links that people have that are out there in the world that link directly to content on Google Podcast. That just went away. It just doesn't exist anymore. Those links are all broken. So, hopefully it's not too big of a deal, but there's no way for me to know because those links are now broken. I have no idea when anyone clicks on those links, that are sending one directly to this other show, or I should say directly to this other podcatcher that is no longer a thing. It's been deprecated worldwide at this point.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about podcasts. So let's kind of segue into somebody who wants to be a short form digital creator like Lamar. And one of the things, and I'm going to start this off here, if we haven't made this clear, Rob and I do not recommend putting all your eggs in one basket. When we interviewed Lamar Wilson in the beginning of July, Lamar said that he feels bad because some of the young people who are creating on TikTok had such an easy time of it, and they make that service so sticky and easy to upload, and they got this enormous following. If something happens to TikTok changes a rule or something, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. I don't want to give too much more away. Those folks are kind of left hurting. They've built their entire business, their entire brand on one particular platform. So our recommendation is to spread your show out over multiple platforms like DTNS does.
Absolutely. And the key here, we mentioned this at the top of the show, is that you just may not want to go everywhere all at once. Like I said, be everywhere is definitely a thing. And when you look at a prolific creator like Lamar Wilson, he is on 6 places where he can post vertical video, but he did not start, on those places all at once. So we're going to just, go through some of these, definitely one that people have heard of is Instagram. So Instagram, of course, is owned by Meta, but Instagram is a place where you have literally millions and millions of people that are creating vertical video for that platform. And one of the things, Bodhi, that I like about Instagram is that in addition to creating vertical video there, is that there's a thing called Instagram Live. So you literally can create a live stream right on Instagram. If you've got a big following there, that may be something that you would want to look at. So, and when we said earlier in the show that when you are starting out, you want to find the places, at the beginning that you want to be, where you're going to plant your flag. If you know that you've got a following on Instagram, because Instagram does allow vertical video and that they also have these Instagram lives, that may be a place where you want to start out.
And knowing kind of what these are huge platforms, so you're going to find a community, depending on what you're into. You're going to pretty much find a community anywhere you go, right? There's all sorts of sub communities within these services, but there are other things it makes more sense. Like if you do a lot of business related content, that makes more sense to offer that on LinkedIn because your people are going to be over there. If you do, so I do an EV news podcast. It would make more sense for me to spend my time on X, honestly, because Elon Musk owns X, and a lot of the biggest Tesla creators happen to be on X, and there's a huge following for that kind of content on X. So if I was going to do anything outside of what I already do, X would be my best choice for that.
And you can take a video that you created specifically for X and then repurpose that and put it on Instagram. But you do want to plant your flag someplace first. So for Kilowatt, it probably makes sense. Absolutely. For, since it is a Tesla podcast, or not a Tesla, it's an EV podcast, but Tesla's talked about a lot. It makes sense to be on the platform where the dude that owns it also is the CEO of the company making arguably the most well-known electric vehicle in the world. We mentioned LinkedIn. If you are doing any type of business related content, I think that many people don't think of LinkedIn as a place that you would ever go as a creator to create content, but that's something that you probably should be taking a look at. I know that you and I are thinking about getting on LinkedIn in this way, specifically for what we're doing with Beyond the Post. There are a lot of people on LinkedIn, and there are a lot of people who are looking for content on LinkedIn. So when you are doing any type of explainer type of content, if you're teaching, preaching to anyone, LinkedIn is a viable place. And one of the other things I like about LinkedIn is that they actually are also giving you the ability to do live streams. So if you do have a following on LinkedIn, you can now go there, do a live stream right within the LinkedIn application. And that's another way that you may be able to get your message out to many, many people who are following you on that platform.
Yeah. And Rob, I'm going to give you all the praise. You, Sierra and Maria from Send It Social, you hammered it into me, LinkedIn. And I was like, I don't want to do LinkedIn. LinkedIn sucks. And LinkedIn is where I find we get the most engagement, whether that's for any of my podcasts that I post stuff up there. I get the most engagement and thoughtful engagement on LinkedIn. And it's in the last, I'd say, 3 to 6 months, it's become my favorite platform for posting and interacting with people, because it's not just LinkedIn, you are dealing with people who work with, certain companies. They're not just going to get up there and blast you and then get off, they have their names attached to it. Their coworkers see this stuff. They're not anonymous. So they're going to give you, either if it's critical feedback, it's going to be done in a way that is helpful. And if it's positive feedback, it just makes your day. There's not, in my opinion, there's not a downside to posting on LinkedIn. But you have to make sure, like if you're just posting a silly dance, that's not going to get a lot of traction on LinkedIn. But if you post something that's thoughtful about mindfulness, for instance, you're going to get a lot of traction because a lot of people on LinkedIn are into mindfulness.
Yeah, really, when you think about it, and this is not a LinkedIn thing or an Instagram thing or a TikTok thing or a Twitter thing, it is, where is your community hanging out? So if you are a process management consultant and you're creating videos about great process management, you know that there are people who are interested in process management on LinkedIn. It makes sense to create your content on LinkedIn so that the audience that is already primed and ready to consume your content, they're already there. So it just makes sense. That content may not make the most sense on TikTok. It may not make the most sense on Instagram, But if it makes sense for it to be on that platform because that's where your tribe, that's where your following is, absolutely you want to go there. Like we said at the top of the show, of all the places that that DTNS posts a show. We said a lot of places, but we didn't say all the places because there's just some places where it just probably doesn't make sense for DTNS to be. But there are places where it absolutely makes sense for DTNS to be, and they tend to cover a great many of them with with just pushing content out to multiple places. So you kind of where your audience is as compared to making your audience have to come and find you.
Okay. And so, Rob, I know we're going to get to TikTok here in a second. We're going to end with TikTok, but I know you're a fan of Threads. So I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about Threads.
Yeah, Threads, I am a huge fan of. So, this is just me. I'm not putting this out there for everyone else, but I still have my verified, X account, but generally I'm only using X at this point for people who send me direct messages, or if someone says, hey, go take a look at this on X because it wasn't somewhere else. I don't actively really go to X any longer. And the reason for that is that since Threads has come out, so many of the people that I was having conversations with on X, they've moved over to Threads. So that's just where the conversation is for me. Threads is relatively new. It's just over a year old in July. And I'll be honest, it does not have near the feature set that X has. X destroys Threads at this point when it comes to features, but it's not the features that I'm on either one of these platforms from. Is for the conversations that I'm having. And I tend to really like talking to people on Threads. I'm probably on that platform darn near every day as far as, novel threads that I'm posting myself, definitely in the comments. That being said, I don't know that Threads is going to be the place for rich communication. They do have the ability, you can create a voice note. It's only 30 seconds. You can post your videos from Instagram very easily over to Threads, and you can upload video directly to Threads. But according to, Atmosari himself, that is, Atmosari is the head of Instagram who also runs Threads. It doesn't look like Threads is going to be a place for like short form vertical content or rich content. That is, they've already got a place for that. That is Instagram. So I'm just kind of testing to see how that works. In some cases, when you post a video, it does actually worse than if you just posted a text type of post over there. So doing some testing and trying to figure it out, but it is another place, just not certain how good it's going to be for rich communication or I should say rich type of content over on that platform. But I do enjoy it right now.
You know what is weird, Rob, is we're talking about all these like Google podcasts and Spotify, and in a minute we're going to talk about TikTok, where you've built your community and you've built your business, and then they take something away, and you're like, dang it. And Threads is like, nah, you just can't have it. Like it's we could do it, but we don't want to.
Well, that's the kind of thing with Threads. It's like, oh yeah, you can post your video here. We just don't really If you really want to get some shine on your video, go post it on Instagram. The head of the organization, the head of the head of Instagram is telling you that. You might want to listen to it. So we will see. I don't think of Threads as the first place that I'm going to go create a vertical video specifically for it and post it there. But I will definitely repurpose stuff from other platforms. I will definitely take videos that I put on Instagram per se and put that over on Threads. It just makes sense for me.
All right. So we've had lots of cautionary tales of what happens when the platforms pull the carpet out from underneath you.
Yeah, algorithm changes. These companies are for-profit organizations. It is free to post your content on any one of these places. So once again, we said this earlier, that when you are posting content someplace for free, you're not necessarily the customer. You're the product. So right now, Instagram is going through some stuff where people are concerned about the algorithm and just not getting the reach that they used to get. The reason that Instagram is making these changes is because they want to basically make as much money as they possibly can off of the platform. And sometimes what customers want, or I should say, sometimes what users want and what the company's goals are kind of misaligned.
What happens when the government takes away the platform?
So yeah, for those who do not know, we passed a law here in the United States that will ban TikTok next year if they do not divest their U.S. interest from their parent company, ByteDance. So ByteDance owns TikTok. ByteDance is a company that is based in China. And right now, relations with China and the United States are just not that great. So one of the big concerns is that you've got this social media application is just absolutely a phenom. I mean, there are millions and millions and millions of people who are using TikTok, and the government is quite concerned that because it is controlled by a company or is owned by a company that is based in China, that it could be used for some nefarious things, whether it be swaying people's opinions on things or what have you. The government has actually gotten together in a bipartisan way and said, no, we are going to ban TikTok in the United States if it is not divested. TikTok clearly is not wanting this. A lot of Americans who use TikTok are not wanting this, but the law has already been passed. It's going to happen unless a court case or something like that comes up. So as Lamar said on this episode, he feels for these people because you've got so many folks who all they do is TikTok. And the problem is that you can't just be on TikTok and say, okay, everybody just go follow me on Instagram and you're automatically going to have the same number of people just automatically go over there and follow you. It doesn't work that way. You've got to work to build your community on whatever platform that you're building that community on. Just saying go here because I'm also there doesn't do it. So I'm not sure what the answer is for this. I remember saying, you know what, maybe everybody should make sure that they're getting, people's emails or something like that. But when, I was kind of schooled on this, there's a lot of folks who are in the TikTok ecosystem. The email is just not a thing for them, at any great level. That's more of a LinkedIn thing. That's maybe more of an X thing. So I don't know what the answer is beyond diversify. Make sure you're not just in one place. In this case, you don't want to be just on TikTok.
I'm going to throw one more thing in there, Rob, because you made a lot of really good points. But there are a lot of people who maybe don't have the biggest following, but they make a pretty significant amount of money through their TikTok shop, whether they're selling their own products or they're getting a little spiff for selling somebody else's products. That doesn't translate going over to Instagram or YouTube or that makes it even more difficult. So folks who have created quite a good small business are now facing having their business kind of ripped away from them. And I don't want to get into the politics of this, but there's a lot that's redacted in the court case, and TikTok can't even see what's redacted. And I don't know how you defend yourself against redacted information. Like, I don't know how that works. I know the judges can see it. And I realize that this is probably they're claiming an issue of national security, but I don't know how TikTok wins if they can't see what the Department of Justice is saying they're doing. How do you defend against that?
I don't know that you can. And because of this, one of the reasons why, regardless of what you feel should happen, regardless of what you think should happen, regardless of what you want to happen, the government is telling you this is what we're going to do. We've in a bipartisan way passed a law that says that if this company doesn't divest its U.S. interest, we're going to block the app. That's been said. People aren't going to like it, but you now have to react to that. And I think that if you just go the ostrich head in the sand approach, you're living very dangerously, because the big time creators that, they already were diversifying, their portfolio as far as where they were posting content. Like we talk about Lamar. Lamar's got millions of followers across all of his, platforms. He's already diversified. So if one goes away, it would hurt, but it doesn't kill his business. There are folks who are only on TikTok. And as I said, if you haven't already started diversifying, now is the time to do it. The time you hear my voice, you want to start thinking about, let's create an Instagram account. Let's create a LinkedIn account. Let's create a X account, and let's get a following of, on that platform, just so that if this does go away, we aren't absolutely devastated because we didn't prepare for it.
Rob, I think we covered everything we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I think so. That definitely wraps it up. We want to just give a shout out to the crew over at Daily Tech News Show for allowing us to take the feed over. And we should let you know that regular episodes of Beyond the Post appear on Wednesdays. You can watch or listen by heading over to beyondthepost.fm. You can also find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast.
Absolutely. And thanks again to the DTNS team for letting us come on and chat.